pioneer in smartphone tech, a career that after 25 years left him wanting more. His focus? From mobile devices to wearable or even injectable ones. Yes, into your own body. I'm Felix on Future Imminent with David Wood, hallmark of transhumanism, co-founder of H Pluspedia, treasurer and co-leader of the UK's Trans-humanist Party, and London Futurist Chair, here on Future Eminent. David Wood, how are you doing today?
It's my pleasure to be in this conversation. We're all coming to terms with the new normal, and we're all figuring out what life means now that we're locked down in many parts of the world.
Are you doing all right after the lockdown?
I'm doing fine, and my wife's fine. We've figured out how to spend our time so we get out a little bit and keep healthy and keep safe.
I'm glad to hear that. Let's start with our very first question. There's been an increasing amount of division in politics as of late. Do you believe there is a way in which transhumanism can improve the situation?
Humanism means being open to using new technologies along with other changes in human society to radically improve all aspects of the human condition. So yes, we can use these techniques to figure out more quickly what cures may be possible, whether it's accelerating the development of vaccines, whether it is repurposing existing drugs such as antivirals, whether it's investigating lots of other approaches such as oxygen treatment or sunlight treatment, or injecting some of the blood products from people who've already been cured and recovered. All of that's possible, and we should have an open mind as to what we can do, but we shouldn't take this lying down. That's not the transhumanist way at all, to be fatalistic.
Moving on. My next question. If universal basic income is implemented, after a certain length of time, there will be those who do not work and without any good reason. What do you propose we do with such individuals, and how do you handle critiques of universal basic income who will use those people as examples to end universal basic income?
I look forward to a time when nobody needs to work for a living. I look forward to a time when we take advantage of automation to provide all the food, all the healthcare, all the material goods, the travel, the education that anybody needs, and we will no longer need to work. And for many people, this is a shocking idea because we have learnt from our cultures, from philosophies, from history that those who don't work are somehow lazy, not deserving. And for most of history, that was a reasonably good thought to have in mind, but that's no longer the case. We can embrace a new way of ordering society. What will people do if they no longer need to work? Well, we can be truly human. We can do whatever it is that we want to do, which will include playing games. It will include exploring virtual worlds. It will include exploring literature of all sorts, including immersive 3D literature. It will include exploring mathematics, music. It will include traveling to the moons of Jupiter and beyond. And some people say, oh, that would be all right for those who are in good character, but there are too many people around, so this criticism goes, who would be completely lazy and who would waste all the resources sent their way. Well, I don't think that's a fair assessment of humanity, actually. It's true, people sometimes do behave in poor ways, but often that's because people have been in bad circumstances in their lives. They have been living in fear. They have been living with various mental problems. They have been living with various social problems. And if we remove these, I believe that's in the capability of every human being to be progressed and uplifted to higher qualities. So I reject any argument that says people will just be lazy. In fact, the evidence from the UBI trials that have taken place, such as they are, Canada, in parts of Europe, India, Namibia, the southern part of Africa, all of them suggest, on the contrary, that people who have got a basic income get their lives together in more and more ways.
So what argument would you propose that will the Trans-humanist Party use if it tries to sell universal basic income to the public? And do any current events help your case at all?
Well, indeed they do. It's striking that more politicians of all stripes from all backgrounds are now open to the idea that Andrew Yang in the United States was associated with, sending everybody a check of $1,000 every month as a basic income. People can see suddenly that jobs which were thought to be secure are no longer secure. People can realize that this may happen to them. Often the critics of UBI belong to the school of thought that says, well, if we're rugged, if we are heroic, if we work hard, if we are smart, of course there will be jobs for us. But now people can realize that they too may risk losing their jobs through no direct fault of their own because of the circumstances of the COVID-19 coronavirus, which is changing how many companies work. And more people will suddenly find themselves, if not out of work, then earning much less than they had previously expected. So not technological unemployment, but technological underemployment. And people are more open to a different social safety net. The same thing happened actually in the United Kingdom after a previous great social upheaval, which was the Second World War. Many people came back from fighting all over Europe, Northern Africa, and the Far East, and they said, we've got to change the way society is structured. And many elements of the welfare state, including the National Health Service, were set up in the few years following the Second World War. These were ideas that had been around for a while, but there hadn't been sufficient momentum behind them previously. But with the changed environment of having come through an existential crisis of the Second World War, then people were more open to them. I think it's going to be the same as we experience more of the horrors and shocks of the lockdown from the coronavirus, that we're going to be more open. And I say we, I mean everybody, not just the transhumanist fringe, but more and more people will be open to looking more seriously at what was previously regarded as being too radical.
Yes, it is interesting. Not only World War II parallels, but the CEO of General Motors yesterday said a World War II-like industrial conversion would be happening in their attempts to produce enough ventilators for the upcoming crisis.
We are discovering, again, how much we can do if we really put our minds to it. Nowadays, it takes a very long time to build a bridge. You need a great deal of planning. In wartime, people built bridges in hours that were good quality. Maybe not quite as solid and long-term as the bridges we would put up, but a great deal can be accomplished. So this can call upon humanity to discover our deepest abilities and to use these deepest abilities to transform our situation. Seems like it's a bad situation, but it could trigger one of our finest hours.
I would welcome that, and I'm sure a lot of people would. Jumping into our next question here, what do you think the effects would be of regulations on enhancements to the human body or other transhumanist related technologies? How would the Transhumanist Party, let's say if there, instead of regulations, even restrictions on these technologies, how would the Transhumanist Party argument against those?
Well, transhumanists vary as regards their attitudes towards regulations. Some say all regulations are bad because they slow down the speed at which we can develop new technology. I don't share that view. I think that some regulations are actually appropriate and necessary because there can be many bad side effects of experimentation. If we think about, for example, DDT was a wonder drug in the sense of it was an insecticide, but it turns out to have lots of bad side effects on elements of nature. If we think about thalidomide, it was a morning sickness drug to help people who were pregnant and unwell, and it turned out that terrible side effects with deformed babies. It's not just there might be unintentional accidents. There are, sadly, lots of people, when I say lots of people, maybe 1% or so of people, who will take advantage of gullibility of humans and offer treatments, claiming the right to offer these treatments, which they know are very unlikely to work. There are people who offer stem cell treatments but aren't actually providing human stem cells. There are stem cells from other creatures, or they might be drugs that are diluted in some ways. So I do think it's appropriate that there are some restrictions in place. I don't want every technology to be freely available and freely pursued. After all, if we look at what might happen with pathogens, we are struggling in the world now with one pathogen. Imagine if lots of people had access to make pathogens more deadly. Now, most people, 99.99%, wouldn't do anything bad, but there is a small fringe, don't know how large they are, who are suicidal, they're depressed, they're fanatical, they're fundamentalistic of one sort sort or another, and they might say they're going to attack their perceived enemies, whether it's America or Iran or China or India or Europe. There will be some really angry people who are mentally disturbed who might get their hands on such technology and use it to unleash an even worse pathogen than we currently have with COVID. No, we have to restrict access to these technologies. So we need some regulations, but it should not be blanket regulations. It should not be heavyweight regulations. It should be agile and lean regulations. And that's a big topic. And we have to argue in each single case what is the appropriate amount of restrictions and what is the way to ensure that we're not blocking genuine innovation as a result. So in this field, I don't think there's a simple, straightforward answer, and we do have to be wise. We have to be sophisticated. We have to be political as regards figuring out how to get rid of the restrictions and regulations that are past their sell-by date, which are no longer relevant, and what other restrictions we need to put in place to protect the society as a whole from possible inadvertent or even deliberate misuses of technology.
Have you heard of Rob Reed?
Bob Reed? Don't think so.
In a recent TED Talk, I just found it interesting how you also mentioned that there are people in the world who, if they could, would kill us all, and the only thing limiting them is their access level to technology. I was just interesting that you touched on that. Thank you.
I have seen that TED Talk now that you've described it. I think it's good and it's well worth people watching. And I like his recommendation that we need to be better in our monitoring, better in our vigilance, and especially we should be fast and agile in our responses. That way we can have more experimentation going on, and we're just watching all the time to ensure that the experimentation isn't having some undesired side effects.
Thank you. Next question. In anticipating tomorrow's politics, it is stated that the Trans-humanist Party should adopt unorthodox strategies in spreading its ideas. Is that limited to accepting all kinds of transhumanists within the party, or does that apply to the means by which the ideology should be spread as well?
I think we need to experiment and try multiple approaches. There are people in every field of life, people from every existing political party and persuasion, who are in principle open to supporting us in at least some of our policies. Like we said, the universal basic income is now attracting support, not just from those on the Democratic side, like Andrew Yang, who have advocated it, but I believe Mitt Romney from the Republican side, and maybe even others on the Republican side are now open to it. So you can have unexpected allies in unexpected places, provided we are subtle enough and wise enough and open enough in exploring ways to collaborate with them. So let's not draw too tight a boundary around ourselves and say you're only a transhumanist if you believe these principles devoutly and follow them. Not at all. We should find allies wherever they are for particular projects that we've got. We shouldn't expect everybody to sign up to the full transhumanist principles straight away, but we can work together where there is sufficient shared interests.
Thank you. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. How do I make it so people want it? Because currently there's a lot of fears surrounding transhumanism.
It's a very important discussion. You must have come across from your studies the concept of crossing the chasm, popularized by Geoffrey Moore about 30 years ago. The idea that innovations can reach a certain level reasonably quickly, a certain level of the population, but then they will get stuck unless they change the way in which they are presented or marketed. And Geoffrey Moore from the Chasm Group says this is the reason why so many startups fail. They have a certain initial traction, but they're not able to change their outreach to go from that very enthusiastic early adopters into what's known as the early majority, people who are looking for much more pragmatic solutions. So we do have to be ready to adopt how we market ourselves. And of course, the hot question is the word transhumanist, which probably isn't very acceptable to the general public. It's tied up with other thoughts, which, for good or for bad, somehow poison people's attitude or openness to have the discussion. So futurist is a more neutral word, and that's a word that I have found opens more doors. I'm quite happy to talk about the philosophy of transhumanism if people are open to having that discussion, but I don't always lead with the concept of transhumanism because I realize it can set off barriers and blocks straight away.
A counter-argument that we often hear against transhumanism is our next question. What do you think the effects of transhumanism will be in a more authoritarian regime like China's compared to more democratic societies?
To echo what I said earlier, I think there are ways to develop transhumanist policies both in top-down country like China and in a country where there is more of a democratic bottom-up principle. So there are ways to get these approaches adopted in both cases. There are dangers in both models too. A democratic society can be subverted by control of social media, by outsiders, by people being distracted, people being misled. This is the thesis of people like Shoshana Zuboff. It is surveillance capitalism in which more of us we're having our autonomy removed from us without us even realizing it. So there are risks in the democratic world. There are certainly risks of authoritarian use of transhumanist technologies. The more of these technologies are available, the more power the state has to keep an eye on everybody, to see early signs of dissent and disagreement, and to stamp it down. If we look at the case of North Korea, possibly the most authoritarian government in the world, if people currently internally dislike their leader, they can have these thoughts internally and get away with it. But at some stage in the future, there may be technology that monitors people's mental state too. And in such a case, people would even have to control their thinking. Otherwise, they would be identified as somebody not sufficiently enthusiastic for the regime, and they might be carted off to prison camp of one sort or another. So there are dangers with both sets of regime, and we're going to have to talk about these dangers and develop collectively solutions to these dangers too. I am fearful about top-down regimes. I think they can accomplish a lot in a short space of time, but the problem with benign dictators is they almost always turn from benign dictators into opposite of benign dictators, ruthless dictators, people who are more centered on their own power than on the well-being of the country as a whole. So we must make the case for responsible democracy rather than just a closing down discussion in the manner of these totalitarian states.
Next question then. Why should the public be more interested in the Trans-humanist Party?
The thing that the public generally doesn't understand is how much change it is going to be possible to see in the next 10, 20 years. They don't sufficiently appreciate that lifespans can be significantly extended over that period of time. They don't realize how quickly artificial intelligence is likely to improve. They don't realize how much can be done to interface more directly with the mind and the brain via various neurotech. They don't appreciate what can be done with nanotechnology, 3D printing, quantum computing, and other improvements in that field either. And we transhumanists have the responsibility to draw these technological possibilities to people's attention and also to explain this isn't just going to make us do the same things as today, but faster, cheaper, and so on. It's going to fundamentally change the human experience and the opportunities for society. If people realize this, they will stop focusing on many of the things that are currently distracting them, and they will learn to say, oh my goodness, the changes that the COVID virus have brought about were largely unexpected. The changes that transhumanist technology may bring about will be several of orders of magnitude larger, and they could be very wonderful, or they could also be terrible if we fail to manage it correctly. Therefore, people should waken up and they should start engaging in conversations, bringing their own wisdom, drawing on the benefits of their own culture, but listening to those people, futurists and transhumanists, who have gone at least a bit further along the path of exploring these possibilities, these opportunities, and these risks.
I was asked to bring up Brexit, be that a positive or negative. What is your opinion on Brexit and how does it affect the plan for the Trans-humanist Party, if at all?
So in the UK, the Brexit issue divided members of the UK Trans-humanist Party. Most members of the party, well, maybe 60% or so, thought Brexit was a bad idea, but there was a sufficient proportion as well who thought it was a good idea. So it has not been a good thing for the UK's Trans-humanist Party, and it's caused people to leave the party, even though the party hasn't officially adopted any point of view. It's clear to outsiders that most of the people who are in the party now think that Brexit is a bad idea because we need to collaborate in this world as we have today. And we see the Brexit analysis as being misguided. It says, the Brexit analysis basically says things have been going badly. There are risks and problems in today's world. And the cause of this is these nasty guys over in Europe and the nasty systems they have put in place. So we accept that there are many problems with society, but we think that blaming immigrants or blaming Europeans is a very narrow analysis, and it's far better to work things out together with our close European partners than to each erect walls and do things separately. As to how Brexit's going to play out, it's still up in the air. Lots of other things have been cancelled in the last few weeks. We've cancelled the Eurovision Song Contest. We've cancelled the Masters Golf Tournament. We've cancelled lots of sporting events. The Olympics are likely to be cancelled. Possibility of having a Scottish independence referendum this year has been put off. More and more people are saying, let's be sensible. Let's push back any discussions on Brexit for the time being. There's far too much to be sorted out in the new trade negotiations. This can't be done in the limited time left by the end of this year. Let's slow things down. So Brexit is in the background of lots of things, but in a way it's better not to focus on it just now. It's better to build new allies with the new focus on responding to the COVID crisis.
I like that take. That's a very good way to look at it. Did you have anything else you would like to say?
As you know, I like to talk. There's lots to mention, but I just want to say in concluding, I'll pick one topic, which is I really like what I'm seeing from this new community on Discord, the Futurist Foundation.
Hey.
And I really like this Future Eminent podcast. I'm happy to see lots of new people that I didn't know before, often quite young people, people with a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm, stepping up to take over some of the mantle from others who have been in the transhumanist and futurist community for longer. This is a project that's going to benefit greatly from the new enthusiasm and the new skills that this, I might say, new generation are bringing. And I look forward to offering whatever advice and support that I can from the sidelines.
That would be great. Thank you. I think many people my age, for reference, I'm 20 years old. Many people my age grew up in the media being told about the great future that was coming, and all of us, at least in my case, I found a lot of my youth hoping for that future and being excited for it. But then as I grew up, the reality was seeped into my brain. I realized it wasn't just going to happen, and the politics of my country, for example, weren't going in that direction. So I wanted to take some sort of action, and now I'm here interviewing you.
Fantastic.
We're going to go from there. If you're, a teenager out there, join us. Help make that future that you're hoping for. This has been David Wood on Future Eminent. Thank you for being with us, David Wood.
It's my pleasure.
I don't do this alone, and I sure wouldn't want to. As the host of Future Imminent, it is my pleasure to thank Nick Gertson for producing, Quinn Cumino-Loon, and several others for their assistance in making this possible, and members of the Futurist Foundation for providing us with the music for Future Imminent.